It was funny listening to you make the reference to growing up with the war. Peter's 3 months older than I am, and
that's why I'm so mature.
That's right. That's why I look up to him. And just thinking about that kind of war and mashed potatoes. You know, sitting down to dinner and seeing troops carrying their wounded through jungle. I mean, I vividly remember that at the age of like 9. And you don't see that anymore because nobody's allowed to provide those kinds of images anymore.
Well, I mean, actually, in a horrible way, with courtesy of the internet, I feel like I do a fair amount of avoiding, because they do like publish things like, you know, beheadings and things like that, which I...
Right, but that's done by the bad guys. I mean, we don't report on it. It's like that's not something that we're informed about as a way of understanding what our government is doing abroad.
Yeah, that's absolutely true, yeah.
You know, it's like when Bush put the moratorium on pictures of the coffins coming back from Iraq. We're in this little bubble, and we rely on the artists to remind us of that.
Well, yeah, I mean, when you think of something like World War II, where everybody was turning toward, you know, there was rubber drives. I mean, basically everybody participated, and there was this austerity and a sense of like, we're at war and we need to do this. And the New Deal is we don't have to do anything besides shop. And that's
right. That's what we were told to do.
Literally, specifically.
We were instructed. So with something like World War III, bless you, there's an expression that's thrown around a lot with people who do aggressively...
Preaching to the converted?
No, speaking truth to power. What do you think of that expression?
Speaking truth to power. I think power mostly ignores us, and that's not what we're not speaking to power. We're speaking to other, you know, people who hopefully will be responsive to the kinds of images. And I mean, it's one of those funny circles. I grew up reading Mad and looking at underground comics, and that all had some politics in it and humor, and responded to all these things that were going on, and definitely was laughing at the pillars of society. I think actually, you know, at that time, they may have had more of an impact on the pillars of society. Absolutely. It's much harder now to do that in many ways, and that, you know, the reason why people pick up on these kind of ideas and are inclined to carry that flag comes from things like, you know, images and these ideas. And if I have to believe in that. And when I was starting to feel very depressed about the lack of impact, and when I got to Mexico, I really felt like it was so ingrained in the society, and it had a daily impact on how people perceived the association of art and their lives, that I realized it certainly exists. It may not exist as much here in a certain way, but it is part of many cultures.
Do you think that I was thinking about that as you were talking about how every other Mexican is an artist, and art is so much a part of their daily life, and we live in a country that is, you know, cutting arts funding both for the public and in the schools. Is it because we're not a more heterogeneous, homogeneous culture? I mean, did the Mexicans have that over us because they do have a kind of culture that everyone can look back at and recognize, and we have a fractured one?
I think so, actually. I think that the way we relate to death is a really good example of how we perceive our position in the universe. It's like we deny it completely. We consider it to be just a dark, bad thing for the most part. We haven't been able to come to a place where somebody who's like in deep pain and wants to die can die without people going to jail. Right. And in Mexico, not that there's a lot of euthanasia there per se, but they have this sense, I really felt a strong sense of them being in a line that they were in the middle of. And I really feel like and I feel like we're at the front of that line that our American sentiment has, what we've been sort of taught is this sense that we're at the front of the line and we're figuring out what the future is going to be. In Mexico, my sense of it was that they felt themselves as part of a continuum, that the past was extremely close to the present, to their present, and that there was this future beyond that, which they were merely kind of like instruments of helping the next generation do something. We've already, unfortunately, been robbing the next generation, through either direct action or inaction. And that there's less of that, the quality of, which probably was like many generations that came to this country had that whole sentiment of, I'm working really hard, I have a really, really crummy life so that the next generation can do well. I think we've been taught pretty heavily that it's our generation that's supposed to be having the good experience, and it's not necessarily in connection to the next.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I know my grandparents came to this country when they were kids, and they didn't want to be seen as greenhorns. They wanted to become Americans right off the bat, and they stopped speaking Yiddish, and they... Total assimilation, and they were assimilating into what's still a very young culture. I mean, we're a young country compared to Mexico. So perhaps that's one of the reasons that we don't understand where we are on that continuum, because we're so close to the beginning, we can't see that there's a continuum ahead of us.
That's a reasonable conclusion. I mean, it could be part of that, having that association. But it's something, I'm not sure how we recapture that, but it seems to me it's something that we really desperately need to do, so that we don't have the sense of like right now is it, and then, because that's closing the door on worrying about the future a bit, or having a consciousness of it. Even if you have kids, I think that people just, I grew up where I was, we were in the generation that we got the benefits of all that hard work, and that it's really hard to like, oh yeah, right, I'm supposed to go back into the coal mines and be in a tenement.
Yeah, it's bizarre when you see the Jacob Riis photos, when to think that that was life in America.
Life in New York, in America,
we don't want to believe that is part of our history. Are you envious at all as a political artist who doesn't think that power is listening and is probably right? Are you envious at all of somebody like Thomas Nast, who was able to actually topple a corrupt politician with his cartoon?
I know Lincoln said that Thomas Nast was like his greatest campaigner. You had like presidents and cartoonists going Kerlink, and it's like, man, can you imagine that? That'd be a different thing. If McGovern said that about me, I'd have been very excited.
It's true. Do you know this great quote that Boss Tweed said when he was trying to get Thomas Nast to stop drawing these cartoons? He said, my constituents can't read, but they can see those damn pictures.
And it's still true. We're an extremely visually literate culture. And so, I felt this, having a kid, there was many times where we'd be in a situation, I was very careful about like what movies she saw and things like that, because images burn into your brain in a way that nothing else does. It's like you could see a big word. It would probably have to say, fuck, to go burn in your brain. But most images, images can burn in your brain. That really famous one of the Viet Cong being shot. That, when I saw that, I was like, I can't go back. And frankly, during 9/11, we had a pretty big moratorium on TV. I did not want to watch the towers come down. Seeing it even once was one too many times, and that I just felt like this is going to really mess me up. But we are very visual, and which suggests that these images can still regain that kind of power, and that I'm always for, in any action, when Occupy Wall Street was happening, there was a minimal amount of big images that were there. The images that came forward, a guy put a dollar bill over his mouth and he's on the front cover of The Economist. And that it was really like ripe for, this is a movement that could really use images. And that anyway, that's part of what World War III has been trying to do is provide that and be like, yeah, well, okay, we're here for you if you want to express what's going on in a visual way.
Yeah, it's true about images. I remember during the Republican National Convention of 2004, is that when Reagan died? Or was that 2000? It was one of the Bush, it was the one that was in New York. Was that 2004? Was that 2004?
Yeah.
Yeah. I was in I was in the march. I marched against the conventioneers, and there was a guy with a poster, had a kind of decaying head of Reagan, and it said, "Not dead enough."
I wish I'd seen that.
So George, in the book, which I hope you all will take home and enjoy very much, I know I did, George doesn't want to bring a child into this world that we live in, but you and Betty brought a remarkable child into this world. So does that mean that you're more hopeful than George?
Yeah, maybe less willing to make the leap of faith that there's, life goes on. I mean, that's one of the things, the monarch aspect of the book is really very much about. And in fact, I'd say, one of the themes in the book is, yes, all these things happen, but life does go on, and we're going to be confronting a lot of things in the not so distant future, but you have to be attracted to life as much as possible, and that amazing what it surmounts. I mean, the butterfly going from Canada, just even on a good day, going from Canada to Mexico as a 1 ounce, little something with some GPS that we don't understand, so that you can mate when you get there, and then turn around and head back up. And the same butterfly will go all the way down to Canada, and then actually make it almost up to Texas. Some of them have made it to Texas, and then go and then talk about like it's for the next generation. But I think that's always a question anyway. I think what, like, is this a world to bring new people into? It just seems so utterly hopeless to say no. That's we're done, and that's that. But it's not without the fact that, say, Emily, my daughter, is going to be having to deal with this special new arrangement, and there's always that hope that she'll help lead the charge.
Somebody will figure it out. Well, she's off to a good start.
Thank you. Yes, fingers crossed.
Is George supposed to be a sympathetic character?
Actually, all the characters are sympathetic characters. They're all in different ways, except for the governor. Right. I'd say, and completely. He's scared of change and feels like things are moving too fast, as he says at one point. Why do we always have to have newfangled? Can't we just have old-fangled? And that, it's that, which, I don't know, I think, I certainly feel constantly irritated by the speed with which the world moves forward, and most particularly as computers come in and you have new symbols that I could barely figure out how to spell check, which I desperately need.
For me, it's the speed of change in Manhattan. I can't, even the Strand is so shiny and bright and well organized now, and
I don't know, I don't mind that.
You don't mind that?
And in the spectrum of things are going to hell, the Strand.
No, I just in terms of, it almost seemed like a metaphor for the changes in New York as we become more of a mall, as we change into franchise restaurants and mall stores and big shiny buildings that are theoretically supposed to look like a Joseph Hoffman wastebasket, but just look like a big middle finger at the sky.
That big middle finger in the sky, I've drawn that picture. A recent metaphor is the building they put next to St. John the Divine. That looks like
which is my corner.
Yeah, it's a
oh my God! But anyway, I have to see it every night when I come home.
We need not go down. How much more can we depress you? Let's see. Let me count the ways.
It's so terrible. 113th in Amsterdam.
That wasn't a segue.
It's so terrible.
It's pretty bad. Yes,
it's so terrible.
Yeah, it's kind of like putting a mall next to the Mona Lisa, but oh well.
Yeah. So, thoughts on the coming election, both as an artist and as a citizen? I imagine that the two elements of you see it in two different ways.
Well, I fear the moment when Trump realizes, I'm glad I don't work for his campaign because I would have probably suggested this. There's you know how George Bush, when he was running, he did this. It was like the
W.
The W. So I fear that Trump is going to figure out one of these. It'll look like this. It'd be perfect. He'd be like, Trump, vote Trump. Fuck you, vote Trump.
You're right.
Yeah, no,
he hasn't done that yet.
One of the things that was really nice about living in Mexico was I stopped getting the paper, and I actually wasn't following the news much at all. It was like a 2-year period moratorium.
God,
you cannot believe the happiness that rains down on you when you don't follow the news. It's just, and guess what? I learned all the key stories. I knew what was going on that mattered. I started making like a new rule, like I am not going to read any story about Britney Spears, or shark attacks, and that all this stuff that it's like it's just it's all these things that are like they're designed to make it impossible to think clearly, and so all the things that went on between Obama and Hillary missed it completely, and then it was like, oh, and now I don't want to go head in the sand about it, but it was really nice to not hear all, because there's so much noise. It's like CNN on a Malaysian flight going down. It's like weeks of how can we talk about this more. It's not really news. It's not really important. It's not really what will matter in your life, and it'll shake out for many different reasons. Suddenly something could happen. I mean, emails could sink Hillary. I don't think they will. Trump could go on and then just disappear. My fear is that there's going to be a Carla Fiorina president, vice president, Trump Fiorina ticket, which would be really dangerous.
Not as bad as a Trump-Palin ticket.
I think she's.
They had a conversation. They liked each other.
Yeah, and she's got a beautiful face. I understand.
She does. I guess.
So he said. But it will shake out, and then we'll know. But there's so much energy that we spend worrying and like parsing out and having conversations about things that are really generally unimportant, have very little to do with the outcomes of these things. We'll have a lot of answers later. And,
I remember when Giuliani
we'll
was a front runner.
Just for example, all the things that you're like, what if that happens? There's just so much of that, and I'd like to. I'm a slave to many of these things currently, but I'd really like to undo that, and because we'd all save ourselves a lot of agita.
We would. I sometimes visit Peter in his studio, and we sit and we just chat like this. And so I've basically been doing this as a kind of, you're sitting in on Peter and me chatting. But perhaps it would be nice if some of you had questions for Peter to chime in at this moment. I think she's bringing a microphone around first here, and then to Emily.
So, like, looking over your career, I think the style of your work or your storytelling is kind of cycled back between, personal memoir at times, and then what I'd call maybe symbolic or allegorical political storytelling. And so I'm wondering, after this really long career you've had, if this sort of more, traditional fictional storytelling is sort of like, do you feel like this is a new direction, or has it sort of changed your relationship to your art, or are you reinvigorated? Not that you were uninvigorated, but what's the effect of this kind of new direction on what you're doing? Well,
definitely reinvigoration for sure. And I felt kind of vague for many years after we got back from Mexico, because stylistically I had very strong direction using stencils and spray paint. And while I was in Mexico, I was like, this spray paint thing has got to go, because I'm just going to be like hi, my name is, what was my name? And just, it's very toxic material. And so I pretty much dropped doing that. But that left this hole in like, okay, well, I have this style that I'm very familiar with, and that is gone. And Scratchboard, which I did Metamorphosis in and a few other things, they stopped making Scratchboard, so it became like a hobby thing. So stylistic things kind of went away, and I was doing a lot of sketchbook work. And the subject matter that I was approaching, and the way I approached it, doing fiction like this, was really, really new, and it was very, very exciting. But I'm really terrible in terms of my boredom level is very high, and if I do one thing, if I do a very, very talky a piece with lots of writing, then the next thing I do is likely to be wordless. And I'm thinking about doing a wordless piece next. I'd like to, I know that the main thing I want to talk about is climate change. I just feel like it trumps pretty much everything. And so however I can fold that into it, I was really, I was relieved that early on in the process that I had figured out a way to include all this thing with the monarch, because that was a way to talk about climate change in the piece, because I know I would have run out of steam. Somewhere along there I would have been like, I'm not talking about the most important issue, and I, you know, like, do these characters matter? I mean, I honestly, pretty much every day that I was working, although I had never been so joyful as I was working on the book, every day I questioned whether I needed to be doing this book at all, whether anybody needed this book. I was just, it was a little cycle of like, you know, there's so many books in the world. I mean, you look around, there's shelves lined with books. Do we need another book? And then it was like, woohoo, I'm doing another book. And it just like this, it was this, you know, these things were colliding all the time. And I would, I put 2 lines down and one of them was wrong. I just felt like, oh, you know, I should be better and all these things. It just kept on being, there was a big fight going on all the time, but it was also sort of it was an energizing thing. But it opened the door on something that I didn't feel as comfortable with, and now I do feel more comfortable with, and I could see doing that. I mean, the experience of having the characters do things that I wasn't planning for, there was a lot of open room for things to change, and there was a couple of points where, say, I'd hit a place in the story where it was like a really awkward transition, and then one of the characters said to the other, that was an awkward transition. And I was like, I think I'll leave that. And there's a character named George, and then there's another character, and I was like, what should his name be? How about George? And like, that's wrong, because, you know, like, you should separate characters and they shouldn't all have the same name. You know, it was like 5 Georges. That would be terrible. It'd be like a Dr. Seuss story or something.
Yeah, George Foreman's family.
Yeah. George Foreman's family. George Jr., that's what I need. And I just was like, I like that. I don't know. It happened, and then there were a few alchemy moments like that where I just thought, like, this is really interesting. It's another area. But now, I mean, I spent 3 years working on this book, and now I mean, I want to do something that's quite different from that, but I feel like I will, you know, I'll return to that. So it's another, I mean, this is the thing about comics that I find just, I'm thrilled about them and just excited to talk about them and share them, is it's just like, it's like a form in its infancy. And there's so many new things you can do. And every time I take a step in one direction or another, it's like, oh man, you can do that. You can do history and journalism and autobiography and just anything you can think of. And, you know, and some of it, it'd be better if you don't think about doing it. But, you know, that it's just all open, and that's just really exciting. And so I want to do a little bit of all of that. I feel very restless that way. And it just, but it's, every time you do that, it's that combination of like horror of doing something it's so new that I'm not sure, like, I have no idea how to really do this. Stylistically, I felt like I was in a bag that I was trying to fight my way out of, and that I know I can do this, and I know I have a style, but I didn't feel like I even understood what it was. And I even now, I wouldn't show this book to an illustration client and say, here's what I do. In fact, I'd avoid that, because it's like, this doesn't really represent what I would do as an illustrator. It just represents what I did in this one graphic novel.
Other questions? I think,
Emily,
right
did you have a question?
Here we go.
I didn't realize I'd have to speak into a microphone. First, I'd like to say I admire your work in public. I said it many times in private. When you said that you, it was about your daughter Emily and then the special news situation that she was sort of inheriting, that caught my ear, and I was thinking about the kind of legacy you're talking about her getting from our generation, let's say, or the generation of many of us in this room, and how that you reconcile that with what I see as an almost philosophical premise of regeneration and renewal. It's even in ruins. The book ends on a beginning. Something's destroyed and something is born out of those ashes. And so do you feel generally that that's how things work? There's hope in a cyclical kind of pattern? Or is that a constant tension in it's hopeful, it's hopeless, it's hopeful, it's hopeless kind of a thing?
Yeah, the constant tension part, I think. You know, I have the good fortune, since I do what I love most of the time, I'd be an idiot if I didn't feel optimistic, because like, well, I'm experiencing, and also I'm really angry because I keep on looking at these things. It's like you know, it's robbing me and everybody of the chance to do this kind of thing. I love my job so much. It's like if you look at a sunset, and you know, do you look at the sunset and do you see that's pollution, light filtering through pollution, or do you see a beautiful sunset? And I see both. It's like I recognize that that's the result of pollution, but boy, is it pretty. So there's this duality that is constantly at work, which is, in my work process, it was completely that. It was literally, does anybody need this book? Will it come out and go, you know, will be the calm before the calm, as they say, the worst fear of any writer or artist. And you know, and does it really matter? And then it's like, well, it matters to me, and I can't, you know, I'm constantly promoting this notion to other artists that like, you can only be guaranteed an audience of one. And so whatever you're doing, you're just like, do you like it? Because if you do, then one person is satisfied. That's the only certainty that there is. And so, you know, and I'm going to be frustrated. With any project I've worked on, I come to sort of, not hate is too strong of a word, but I just like, I'll reject it and put it on the shelf. I mean, I read Ruins again a couple of days ago, and I hadn't looked at it for a while. I became like physically ill looking at it, like all the problems were just evident, and I got to read it as a new reader again, and I felt like, okay, I know what I want to change. I've actually already sent changes to the publisher in the event that there's a second edition. It's like, you move that page over there because it's like I screwed it up, and you know. But overall, I felt like, well, you know, I'm putting my foot forward. It would be very hard to do anything if I really thought it through too hard, because it's like I would never have adapted the Metamorphosis if I looked at it and said, are you out of your effing mind? Kafka will spin in his grave. This is a horrible thing. And, you know, it's just like I have no business doing that. But
I like you some Kafka.
Yeah, I like me some Kafka. funny fellow. But, you know, I mean, there's a leap of faith, and I think like living is a leap of faith, and having a kid is that, and then they're going to inherit that sentiment. But, you know, again, it's like that the next generation might be the one that saves us, or at least carries on a fight towards something better. And giving up just seems like that's at least a sure thing. Like if you just say, we're doomed. I always say we're doomed, but I feel like optimistic in the face of that. Like, well, then if we're doomed, I mean, when I was 8, I saw the movie Failsafe, where there's accidentally the U.S. bombs Moscow. In order to prevent World War III, we have to allow Moscow to bomb one U.S. city. It turns out it's New York, and I wanted to move there. And that exploded as an 8-year-old. That exploded in me, and it's never left. And it had the absolute duality of making me feel like we're doomed. There's this thing that exists that could just wipe us all out in a second, but therefore I must get X, Y, and Z done before that happens.
All right, well, that's positive.
And so I'm always running on doing a book with great hopes that it can get printed and out and in people's hands before whatever catastrophe hits. I can do that with like kicking my heels up. So I think it's a good way to go.
We can take one final question if there is one.
I have a comment. Peter, you've inspired me every day. I just wanted to wish you a happy birthday.
Thank you.
Wow. Well, that actually stole my thunder because I was going to announce that it is Peter's birthday today, and we should all celebrate with a rousing chorus of happy birthday to you.
Oh, yeah. No, if you're going to do that, it has to be the extremely short version. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. In fact, I just did it. Thank you so much for coming. I really appreciate it.